Welcome to the Inside Syracuse Basketball podcast. I'm Mike Waters. Today on the podcast, I'm joined by the NCAA Senior Vice President for Basketball, Dan Gavitt. In his position, Gavitt is overseeing college basketball's attempt to navigate a season in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic. How will teams avoid long shutdowns and play as many games as possible? And how important is it for the sport's future to hold the NCAA tournament next March? Listen in as Dan and I discuss the challenges that are being faced this season. Okay, we're joined here on the Inside Syracuse Basketball podcast by the NCAA Senior Vice President, Dan Gavitt. Dan, how are you? And I know that's a loaded question these days.
I'm great. It's good to be with you. Everything's going fine. Busy, but excited about the prospects of this very unusual season we're looking forward to.
I want to get to this unusual season, but we can't just hit you hard with the season and the coronavirus stuff right out of the box. You know, for me, it's an honor and a pleasure to have you on the podcast because, you know, I grew up as a kid. I saw your dad's Providence teams in the 70s with Marvin Barnes and Ernie D and Kevin Stakem. And then when I finally had a chance to meet him, you know, by the time then he was commissioner of the Big East, by the time I was a beat writer here in Syracuse. And he was such a great guy and obviously did so much to shape Eastern basketball and especially Syracuse basketball.
Sure.
What do you remember about those early days of the Big East, you know, with this conference that your dad put together?
Well, it's almost surreal thinking back on it now, these 40 years later, with all the incredible success that the programs have had, the conference had, the players, the coaches, but mostly I think back about the relationships, Mike. You know, I mean, as you well know, I mean, the conference was built on relationships, and it sustained it for the longest time because the relationships, that my dad had with coaches, with Coach Boeheim, Coach Thompson, Coach Carlissimo, you name it, right down, and then the relationship the coaches had amongst each other. You know, it wasn't always incredible tight friendships. In some cases, it was really bitter rivals, as we know, but incredible level of respect. And so I really think, about the early years as being kind of intimate in terms of those relationships. You know, it's gotten so big and the programs have been so successful, national championships and All-Americans and NBA players, Hall of Famers indeed. But in those days, it was relatively unknown coaches, administrators, players that were good but not maybe great nationally. And so the relationships were very genuine. And it was kind of as you, I'm sure, think back on it, a little bit of a mom and pop operation. Like, the first couple Big East tournaments were in Hartford, Providence, and Syracuse. And, everyone thinks about Madison Square Garden, but it wasn't until the fourth year that they ended up at Madison Square Garden. And of course, it was incredibly successful. But I guess, it's that kind of like, entrepreneurial business that started with people that had great respect and had competed against each other. My dad coached against Syracuse and St. John's and Georgetown and Boston College. So they had these relationships through coaching in the game that helped to build what was really a pretty amazingly successful thing and continues to sustain, programs, even in a different conference like Syracuse is now. And so much success had begotten from those early days of the Big East.
Your dad was obviously an incredibly successful coach. And then, of course, with his influence there on the Big East and becoming the league's first commissioner, you were destined to go into college athletics some way, somehow. Why did you choose the administrative side rather than coaching?
Well, I don't know, as I think back on it exactly, how I've gotten to where I am or why. But I did start in coaching, actually. I started as a graduate assistant coach at Providence College working for Rick Barnes, and was there in various different roles as I kind of came up through his staff for 6 years. And so as I think back on what, where my career has gone since then, that really is the foundation that helped me even to where I am today. I mean, I built relationships with Coach Boeheim and Jay Wright and John Thompson, and assistant coaches that went on to become head coaches, John Calipari and Tom Crean, you name it. Like, a lot of those relationships goes back to my early days as an assistant coach. And of course, I learned a ton about the game at the same time, and even started to get some administrative experience, because I was the graduate assistant, the part-time assistant, the volunteer restricted earnings assistant that did all of the kind of administrative stuff on campus. So I arranged all the campus recruiting visits. I arranged all the team travel, our basketball camps, dealt with ticket issues, you name it. And so I was kind of getting, along with the coaching experience, some administrative experience that it's at bigger places I wouldn't have gotten, but at a small college like Providence, I got some of that kind of firsthand administrative experience that led into becoming an athletic director, and then a conference office staff member, and then now here at the NCAA. So, that's kind of, I didn't realize that all those different experiences were preparing me for what I'm doing today, but they all did. And it really did start with that assistant coaching experience back in the late 80s, early 90s.
Well, and you've had a great career, and now here you are with the NCAA, and I would imagine you're about to encounter your greatest challenge of your career with trying to navigate a season with the coronavirus pandemic still going on. Recently, we've seen a spike in cases around the country, especially in certain regions, but college football games are getting canceled and postponed now. What is your level of optimism as we get ready to start the season, that we're going to be able to see this through and complete a season and get to the NCAA tournament?
I'm cautiously optimistic still, Mike. I respectful of the pandemic and the great challenges that we will see during the season that we're seeing play out in college football as well. But I am confident because I think we have good protocols in place, first and foremost, medically, for the health and safety of the players and coaches and everyone around the programs. If it wasn't for the availability of testing that we have today, so that we can test a minimum of 3 times a week, every week, of both players, coaches, referees, anyone that's around the inner bubble or the tier 1 of teams, then I don't think we'd be ready. I know we wouldn't be ready to do this in a safe and responsible way. We did put off, as you know, the start of the season by 2 weeks. It's important that we had those 2 weeks. We still, just recently kind of finished some of the protocols around referees and officiating, some of the challenges there. And schools have continued to work with their local health authorities on travel ban issues and quarantine issues and things that are going to be challenging right through the entire season. But I am cautiously optimistic that we will do it. I also am and certainly understanding that we're going to have disruptions. And we're seeing that in college football. We've had games regularly postponed or canceled. The same will happen in college basketball, unfortunately, but it's the reality of trying to do something, like this in the middle of a pandemic. And so, we have to expect the unexpected. I think coaches and players have to be prepared for those kind of interruption and disruptions and kind of take things day to day. But, all those things are in place in order to protect the health and safety of everybody involved too. So you kind of take the challenges with the opportunity here to have a representative season. I don't know that we're going to have, every team in the country, play the full allotment of 25 to 27 games. I'm actually quite sure that that's not going to happen in most cases. But if we can have, seasons that are with minimal disruptions where teams can, basically complete the vast majority of their schedules, and that can be a representative season for the players that leads into the NCAA championship, which I'm very confident we're going to do and do well. And I think, it's well worth the effort, because the other thing that the NCAA membership decided, like for fall sports, is that is you can get back this year of eligibility, whether you play one game or you play 25 games. And so, in many ways, it's an extra year. It'll be a challenging year that will be unlike any other. But I think, in every conversation I have with coaches, their players want to play, coaches want to coach. Obviously, want to do that only if we can do it safely and responsibly. But I'm hopeful that we can do that, and it's going to be, like I said, a representative season, albeit a different one.
How much optimism rest, or maybe it's how reliant is the season on this window that's being created with most college students leaving campuses around Thanksgiving and probably not returning till late January, and thereby creating kind of a bubble for the basketball players that are left on campus? I mean, how much is this 2-month window critical to the year?
Well, it was the key to the decision that was made to push back the season by 15 days and start on November 25, because we knew that when that decision was made in the middle of September, that 3/4 at least of all Division I schools will have either ended their first semester in total, or at least, as you know, Mike, will have broken for the break and gone to virtual classes in December, and then online exams to finish the semester. So you're dealing with far less populated campuses, a much more controlled environment, and we think that provides the optimal opportunity to play games in a safe and responsible manner to have the season get off to a successful start. One of the things we've learned is that the opportunity for infection is near zero from what we understand around competition itself, right? Like, it doesn't seem like this disease is spread through athletics competition. It is certainly spread by meals, by interactions socially that happen, outside the athletic facilities, parties, interactions with family members, greetings, whatever it may be, that then, comes into the athletic facilities or locker room or onto the playing field in that way. And so that's where the challenges lie. So we think that, to your point, having many weeks between the end of November until mid to late January in some cases to play a good portion of the season might provide the greatest opportunity. Unfortunately, it's also overlaid now, which we didn't know in September, by, a significant spread of the disease nationally, a spike in most every geographic area. So that puts some more challenge around travel. But I think conferences have been very much focused on trying to limit travel and make it more regional in nature. And of course, we'll have far reduced attendance if there's any fans at all in facilities, and that will help, I think, create an environment that's as most health and safety as we can as well.
Hoping that you do get to March and that we're going to get to a tournament this year, is it going to look the same? Are you still going to have the first weekend with all the various sites and then the second weekend and then Final Four? Or is there a chance that you, for lack of a better word, constrict the tournament and bring it into, smaller areas, or maybe even a bubble?
Well, we've been working with the basketball committee for the last couple of months on every couple of weeks basis we meet, which is unusual. They don't usually meet except in July and then again in November in a normal year, but of course this is anything but normal 2020. So we've been meeting regularly with them, doing contingency planning, looking at a lot of different alternatives to make sure that we can have the tournament safely and responsibly and successfully. And a lot of things you mentioned are things that are being considered. Again, we're relying on the guidance of the medical group that we work closely with. We've learned an awful lot from what's gone on this summer and this fall with other sports, whether it's the NBA and WNBA, NHL, Major League Baseball, college football, the NFL, you name it. What's been successful, what's not been so successful. And we've learned from that. And we're applying those lessons to decisions about the 2021 tournament. Not there yet, but we're getting closer, I think, to making some decisions. I do think the tournament will look a little bit different than it is normally. And it has to, probably, given the challenges that we're faced with. But, I've got the greatest level of confidence on the tournament, actually, even in somewhat comparison to the regular season, because some of the challenges that we're going to see during the regular season, travel, isn't necessarily what we're going to be able to have to do during the tournament. We can make some adjustments for the 2 to 3 weeks that we run the tournament that are just not as practical or as feasible during a several month regular season. So I do think that we have a great opportunity to have a very successful tournament, and we're getting closer to making some decisions on what those contingencies could look like.
Speaking of the tournament, the selection committee never has an easy job. And this year, with non-conference schedules being reduced, and who knows, even if the teams have to cancel a game, it could be reduced even further. If conference schedules get reduced, it gives the committee less to go on. So have you already talked to the folks on that committee about what you're going to try to do if all of a sudden you're comparing Team A that played 22 or 24 games versus Team B that managed to get in 15 but no non-conference?
A great challenge. There's no question about it, Mike. Like you said, challenge every year. This year, unlike any other. The good news is we've got a great committee. It's a veteran committee. We only have one new committee member. We got great leadership with Mitch Barnhart, the athletic director of Kentucky, as the chair, and they'll do an exceptional job. They're going to have to work as hard as they ever have in watching games, in evaluating teams. Both objectively and subjectively. We know that some of the metrics that we use, including the NCAA evaluation tool, the NET, could be compromised somewhat if there are very few non-conference games or none in some cases. But we've identified some other metrics, some other statistical categories that we think can help to evaluate teams for selection and seeding. But as much as anything, it's going to require an awful lot of observation, a lot of deep dive into resumes that are going to be not going to be apples to oranges. As you know, in some cases, they're not going to look exactly the same with the number of games that are played. But at the end of the day, their job is still the same: to select the 36 best teams as at large, and then to seed the field, 1 through 68. And it will likely be imperfect, just like the season may be slightly imperfect in the tournament as well. But I know that they'll do a terrific job, and we'll have a great tournament.
Last question for you, Dan. In terms of the tournament, having lost out on last year's March Madness, financially speaking, how critical is it for the NCAA and its member schools to have a tournament this year? Because as we've seen with athletic departments dealing with budgets, we've seen a lot of non-revenue sports programs get eliminated. So I just wonder where, you probably have a better idea than I do about where some schools stand financially and how reliant they are on the NCAA tournament.
Well, I don't think it's irresponsible to say that much of the underpinning of the finances of member institutions is from the Division I men's basketball championship. It's over 90% of all the revenue that the NCAA brings in and then distributes almost all of it to its member institutions. So it is a critical event, and it is every year. But we've never experienced having to cancel it and the financial ramifications of that we experienced last year. So it's vitally important. There's no question about it. But it's only important if we can do it in a safe and responsible way, because the most important thing we do is to look after the student athletes and coaches, and the same is true at the conference level and at the institutional level. And it's with that in mind that we have this confidence that it can happen. And of course, players want to play in it, coaches want to coach it, and media want to cover it, and fans want to watch it. So I know that it'll be something that everyone is very much anticipating and looking forward to, especially after having it taken away last year, like so many things in 2020. And I'm confident that we're going to have a terrific tournament and a great opportunity to celebrate March Madness again in 21.
Well, fingers crossed we can get there and that everyone gets there safely as well. I know I missed out on the tournament last year. As a college basketball writer, I'm a college basketball fan as well. So it was really sad last year, especially the impact on the student athletes that didn't get it. But so hopefully we do get there, Dan. We're all relying on you.
We've got a great team, so I'm relying on my team, and we've got great support from coaches and ADs and commissioners and our television partners and corporate partners. So we're going to get it done, but we're going to get it done in a very safe and responsible way.
Well, I hope so. And I thank you again for joining us here on the Inside Syracuse Basketball podcast. It's been a pleasure, Dan. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Best to all my friends in Syracuse. Be well.